The courtroom was packed that day, the air heavy with tension. All eyes were on Olivia Carter, a young, determined lawyer standing at the plaintiff's table. She had spent months preparing this case, gathering evidence and rehearsing every argument in her mind. This wasn't just any case. This was about justice for her father, a man wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. At the judge's bench sat Harold Whitman, a man known for his no-nonsense approach. With years of experience, he had built a reputation for being stern, sometimes even dismissive. As Olivia presented her case, his expression remained unreadable, his fingers tapping against the wooden bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "The evidence clearly shows that my father was framed, the DNA report." Judge Whitman raised a hand, cutting her off. "Miss Carter, enough." His deep voice echoed in the silent room. "I've reviewed the case, and quite frankly, it lacks merit. There is no concrete reason to reopen this trial." A murmur ran through the audience. Olivia clenched her fists, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "But, Your Honor, I said enough." His tone was final. He turned to the opposing attorney, barely hiding his impatience. "Motion to dismiss is granted." A sharp gavel strike sealed the decision. For a moment, Olivia couldn't move. She had poured everything into this case, believing in the system, believing that the truth would matter. Now, in a matter of seconds, it was over. Judge Whitman glanced at her. "You're young, Miss Carter. Learn to pick your battles wisely." Heat rushed to her face. She wanted to scream, to argue, to demand he listen, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Instead, she gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out of the courtroom, her father's face flashing in her mind. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. She had lost. But deep down, something inside her refused to accept defeat. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The defeat lingered in Olivia's chest like a heavy stone. That night, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the pile of legal documents scattered across her kitchen table. The words blurred together, but one thought remained sharp in her mind. Judge Whitman had dismissed her father's truth, as if it meant nothing. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the years, when her father was arrested, when the trial went wrong, when appeal after appeal was denied, but she had always believed that one day, if she worked hard enough, she could change things. That day had been today. And she had failed. She thought about her father, locked behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. How many nights had he stayed awake, hoping she would find a way to bring him home? How many times had he told her, "Olivia, you're gonna do great things. Just don't let the world break you first." Her hands curled into fists. She wouldn't let this break her. If Judge Whitman thought she was too young, too inexperienced, too insignificant to fight back, then he had no idea who he was dealing with. She needed to be more than a lawyer fighting from the outside. She needed power, influence, a voice that couldn't be ignored. And there was only one way to get that. She would become a judge. The realization sent a surge of energy through her veins. It wouldn't be easy. It would take years of relentless effort, of climbing her way up through a system designed to keep people like her in their place. But she would do it. And one day she would return to that same courtroom, not as a desperate lawyer begging for justice, but as the one holding the gavel. The thought alone made her heart pound. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and picked up her law books. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The years that followed tested Olivia in ways she never imagined. She buried herself in work, taking on case after case, proving her skill in the courtroom. Every late night, every rejected motion, every loss fueled her determination. She pursued a master's in law while juggling a full-time job at a public defender's office. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was where she learned the most, standing beside people who had been overlooked, just like her father. People whispered when they saw her drive home at dawn after pulling all-nighters. Some colleagues doubted her, saying she was too emotional, too stubborn, too ambitious for her own good. But she never wavered. She worked harder. She built connections. She gained the respect of those who once dismissed her. One by one, doors started opening. She was appointed as a magistrate judge first, a small role, but a foot in the door. From there, she climbed steadily, district court, appellate court. Each step forward brought her closer to the ultimate goal. Still, despite all her achievements, there was one thing that hadn't changed. Her father was still in prison. His health was failing. Each visit, Olivia saw the way time had worn him down. His voice remained steady, but his hands trembled when he reached for hers. "I'm proud of you," he told her every time, "but don't lose yourself in this fight." She held his hands and smiled, but inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. Then one evening, she received the call that would change everything. The governor had nominated her for the state's Supreme Court. Olivia sank into her chair, gripping her phone tightly as the words echoed in her ears. She had made it. She was one step away from the ultimate seat of power. And if fate had any sense of justice, she would come face to face with Judge Harold Whitman once again. The day Olivia Carter was sworn in as a Supreme Court justice, the entire legal world took notice. She was young, brilliant, and relentless, a woman who had fought her way to the top against all odds. But for Olivia, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a promise kept. Her father's case remained in the back of her mind, unfinished business that she could never let go. And now, for the first time in her career, she had the influence to do something about it. Then, fate handed her a moment she never saw coming. One morning, as she reviewed the upcoming cases on her docket, her breath caught in her throat. Judge Harold Whitman was appealing for a reinstatement to the bench. He had retired years ago, but now he was seeking an honorary position as a senior judge, a move that required the Supreme Court's approval. And Olivia would be one of the justices presiding over his hearing. A slow, almost disbelieving smile spread across her lips. For years, she had dreamed of facing him again, of looking him in the eye as an equal, or perhaps even something more. Now the man who once dismissed her, who told her to pick her battles wisely, would be standing in her courtroom. This wasn't just a meeting. This was justice, coming full circle. The courtroom was packed, just as it had been all those years ago. But this time, Olivia wasn't standing at the plaintiff's table, pleading for justice. She was seated at the bench, wearing the black robes of a Supreme Court justice. The air was thick with anticipation as Harold Whitman entered. His once imposing figure had softened with age, his hair grayer, his steps slower. But his presence still commanded attention. He walked toward the podium, adjusting his suit with the same air of confidence he had carried for decades. Then, his eyes met Olivia's. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face: recognition, surprise, perhaps even regret. She didn't look away. "Judge Whitman," she began, her voice steady, "you are here today, seeking reinstatement as a senior judge. The court will hear your argument. You may proceed." There was no hint of resentment in her tone, no outward sign that this moment was anything other than routine. But deep inside, she knew, he knew. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." Your Honor. The same woman he had once dismissed as a young, inexperienced lawyer was now sitting in judgment over him. He made his case, speaking of his years of service, his dedication to the law. He highlighted his experience, his past rulings, and why he believed he still had value to offer. His voice was controlled, but Olivia could see it, the slight hesitation, the careful way he chose his words. When he finished, the room fell silent, all eyes turning to the bench. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "Judge Whitman, you once told me to pick my battles wisely." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "That was valuable advice. I took it to heart." A muscle in his jaw tightened. He said nothing. She glanced at the other justices, then at the documents before her. The decision wouldn't be hers alone, but her voice would hold weight. She could dismiss him the way he once dismissed her. Or she could be better than him. She took a deep breath. The court will deliberate and issue a ruling soon. With that, she stood. The gavel struck. The hearing was over. But the real judgment was still to come. The deliberation was brief. The other justices discussed Judge Whitman's request, weighing his experience against his history. Olivia listened quietly, offering measured responses when needed. But deep inside, memories churned. The way he had dismissed her father's case without a second thought. The way he had looked at her like she was insignificant. Now he was the one waiting for a decision. 2 days later, the ruling was announced. The courtroom was full once again, with reporters eager to see how the Supreme Court would decide the fate of a once powerful judge. Olivia sat at the bench, her expression unreadable. Judge Whitman stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, his face stoic. Justice Marshall, the presiding judge, spoke first. After careful deliberation, the court has reached a decision. The room tensed. Whitman remained still, though Olivia noticed the way his fingers tightened around his wrist. Marshall continued, Judge Harold Whitman's request for reinstatement as a senior judge has been denied. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Olivia didn't move, her face unreadable. Whitman inhaled sharply, the only crack in his otherwise composed demeanor. Marshall finished reading the ruling, citing the court's reasoning, his past rigid interpretations of the law, his tendency to dismiss cases without due consideration, and the fact that, in their view, his time had passed. When it was over, Whitman looked directly at Olivia, and for the first time she saw it. Regret. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking out of the courtroom, his steps slower than before. As the doors swung shut behind him, Olivia let out a quiet breath. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't about getting even, it was justice. And for the first time in her life, she felt the system had finally worked in her favor. But there was still one more battle left to fight. Her father's freedom. With Judge Whitman gone, Olivia turned her full focus to the case that had started it all, her father's wrongful conviction. She had spent years gathering evidence, but now, with her position on the Supreme Court, she had access to resources she never had before. She combed through old court records, witness statements, and forensic reports. And then, she found it. A discrepancy. A key witness in her father's trial, one whose testimony had sealed his fate, had changed their statement before the final ruling. The original version had been buried in court transcripts that Judge Whitman himself had dismissed as irrelevant. This was it. The missing piece. With this new evidence, Olivia petitioned for a retrial. This time, there was no indifferent judge standing in her way. The Supreme Court reviewed the case, and within weeks, the verdict was clear. Her father's conviction was overturned. The moment she heard the ruling, Olivia felt something in her chest crack wide open. Years of grief, anger, and exhaustion melted into a single, overwhelming emotion: relief. The day her father walked out of prison, he was frail but smiling. The first thing he did was pull her into a long, tight hug. "You did it," he whispered. Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat. We did it. She had spent years fighting the system, climbing higher, proving herself. But in the end, this, standing beside her father as a free man, was her greatest victory. Months later, as Olivia sat in her chambers, a letter arrived. No sender's name, just a simple envelope. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, were 4 words. "You chose your battles well." She didn't need a signature. She knew exactly who it was from. Olivia stared at the words for a long time before finally setting the letter down, a small, knowing smile on her lips. Justice had been served. And she was just getting started. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this powerful story of justice, resilience, and redemption, don't forget to like this video and comment your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you think. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping story. And if you found this inspiring, share it with your friends and family. Your support keeps these stories coming. See you in the next one.